sustainability has been kind of one of those key words thrown around a lot, especially from the environmental side of things. And to me, it goes hand in hand with commodity manufacturing. You need to be as efficient as possible. I kind of look at them as in sustainability and efficiency. And we focus on efficiency because obviously we're making a commodity product here. Most bleaches are about the same thing. There is a little difference with the Paragon Ultra Pure bleach, obviously. But we kind of look at that. We look at this as the next evolution in chlorination. It is much more sustainable and much more efficient, both for a ratepayer and for a business, to manufacture at a higher strength, deliver that higher strength, which is pure and better, and then the customer dilutes it on site.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Going Beyond the Deal podcast. Today, we have a special guest, Zach Kuehne, the president of Kuehne Chemical Company. Super interesting podcast today. You're going to learn a lot about an industry that we don't give too much thought on, but it's really saving more lives than anything else out there. Clean water is, something that we need to live, obviously. But I never realized how much of an impact a company like Kuehne would have on our society as a whole. You're going to gain some insights from a gentleman who started, working for a family business at, kind of at the lower level, and then took the reins of the president role a couple years back. But very interesting company, started in 1919 in a basement in Jersey City. And now here we are today, over 100 years later. So you will get a lot out of this. And please join me in Going Beyond the Deal. Today, I have my friend Zach Kuehne, president of the Kuehne Company. We ended up meeting each other through the Association for Corporate Growth, the Corporate Growth Awards that I host every year. Zach is a recent award winner and part of a third-generation family-owned chemical manufacturing business. We've been talking a little bit about kind of the background and some of the challenges of this business. We should have been recording earlier, but we're going to start now. Zach, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me today, Michael.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, man. It's a pleasure. So let's get into, before we get into the history of Kuehne, let's talk a little bit about you. Let us know about you a little bit, and then let's get into the history of the company.
Yeah, sounds great. My history, I was born a little separate from the business. I grew up down in the hills of North Carolina, Brevard area, which is near Asheville.
Beautiful.
Most people probably heard of that recently because of the Hurricane Helene and the devastation that it caused down there. So, I'm kind of a backwoods country boy, grew up out in the middle of nowhere. I was homeschooled up through 5th grade anyways. So, I've got that awkwardness going for me too. And I think growing up in the woods, is a heck of a lot different than the average experience most kids have these days. But it taught me some interesting things about kind of independence and, what it means to be self-reliant a little bit as well. I used to, as a kid, kind of hate it that, I didn't have the friends group and the townies and, I didn't get to run around with them and everything. But in retrospect, later in life, I kind of appreciate that fact and love it because it gave me kind of a self-dependence, self-reliability. A lot of people go crazy if they're in a room by themselves for more than 5 minutes, but it just feels like normal life to me. So
yeah, I always say the same thing about, I was really involved in scouting when I was younger, and it's one of those things where as I got older, it wasn't the coolest thing to be doing, right? But it gave me this breadth of experience and self-reliance from, how to take care of myself, how to cook, how to hunt, how to make shelter for myself, how to actually survive. And you don't realize how important that is then. But as you get older, you're like, oh my God, I'm so much more self-reliant than most people.
100%. You figure out what you're made out of. Spending a night out in the woods by yourself, definitely. And, not to sound too hippy dippy, but it definitely creates kind of a connection between you and nature, and
Yeah,
I think is important for anybody to really realize what life is all about.
absolutely.
The 90% of life that we experience in civilization is really pretty different than what it's all about when you're out there in the woods and it's just you versus man versus wild, so to speak.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
that's definitely a very fulfilling thing to be able to experience and to understand and not be afraid of either.
Yeah. So take me from Asheville, North Carolina, homeschooled through 5th grade. Did you have the awesome beard back then, or is
No, this is more of a recent development
recent
here.
development? Okay. Yeah, you were saying man
I
versus
think
wild. I was going to say you got the beard and everything going for you. So, and then
I wish my survival skills were a little bit better. I was certainly never an Eagle Scout or anything like that. I think most of my outdoor experiences consist of watching YouTube videos of other people doing it these days, sadly. But
yeah,
I am getting down to North Carolina. I try to get back down there every year. My mom still lives down there, and it's one of the things I feel like kind of refreshes my spirit, is being able to spend some time outdoors.
absolutely,
Like kind of like you said, building that shelter or whatever it is, just enjoying nature.
for sure.
So I went to private school in middle school and high school, college prep, and then ended up going to Drexel University,
Oh wow.
and kind of thinking to myself, like, hey, I want to know what the big city's like. I want to work at the family business, which was a little bit different than I think most people's experience growing up in a family business. We have a location in back then it was just New Jersey and Delaware. And so I'm all the way down in North Carolina and had very little exposure to the business. Whereas my dad, grew up working there every summer since he was 10 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of one of the themes in life, is that, my mom told me that, his family very much kind of told him, this will be your path in life. You're going to take over the business, et cetera, et cetera. It's one of the reasons he went to MIT, became a chemical engineer. But he always told her that he didn't want his kids to feel the same way. So he had 6 children. I'm the youngest of 6. And he never forced it on them that they needed to work there, that this had to be their destiny or
Did any of
anything
them
else.
work at the company?
Yes, one of them did for several years. My sister worked there for a couple years as well, but from more of a remote capacity. And it didn't really work out for my oldest brother,
Yeah.
Pete Jr. was his name. My father was also a Pete. So he was there, but this was decades ago. And I didn't start working at the company until 2017. I graduated college, kind of did my own thing for a little while. One of my dad's rules was that you needed to work somewhere else for at least a year.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of wisdom behind that, because it's certainly, a lot different having the last name of the company that you're at. People obviously treat you a different way. And
Yeah.
I think it's very easy to fall into that kind of false sense of leadership or ability, even, when everybody there is treating you differently.
Yeah.
Whereas you work somewhere where you're not associated with ownership, you're just one of the, you're just one of the troops, basically.
I've heard that
So I
from
got a
other
little
people before, right? I mean, my uncle was an owner of a pretty large business, and that was the rule. It's like, hey, you're not forced to join the business, but if you're interested in joining the business, you got to go somewhere else and work for a little while, and you got to earn your stripes first. So that's it's brilliant by your dad for sure.
Yeah, I think that was wise. And I sort of tried doing my own thing after college, living with mom. I kind of did the pitfall that I think a lot of people do. They start a business with a friend, and obviously business and friendship are very different things. So, I learned some hard lessons from that.
What type of business?
Mushroom farming, oddly enough.
Mushroom farming. Interesting.
So my dad's hobby, and one of the reasons he moved out of North Carolina, was because he grew up in the North in Jersey, New York. I think he was actually born in Brooklyn. And he just hated the North, hated the weather up there more than anything, the cold winters and everything. And so he moved out of North Carolina and would commute back and forth on a pretty regular basis. But he loved gardening, and he built his own greenhouse business, basically from building a shop, and then he manufactured every single greenhouse the hoop houses. I mean, we had hoop houses that were 200 feet long and 60 feet wide. He had about 4 of those at the end of the day, and he engineered every piece of this business and built it all out of a shop right there with about 5 other guys that metalworking, carpentry, everything like that. But all the controls, he built a massive biomass burner, which is essentially a wood chip burner, to heat the water that would then circulate throughout and keep the greenhouses warm in the wintertime. And that also heated the water at our house up the hill too. So, I mean, he was certainly an engineer, and it was pretty amazing all the things he was able to accomplish and maintain on his own. With a small team down there.
Very cool.
So I kind of got involved on that after he passed away in 2003. I kind of had seen this greenhouse business kind of become dilapidated, and I mean, we didn't keep the business around as a greenhouse business, but all the structures were still down there and everything. And I thought, hey, maybe I can do something to generate a little revenue down here and kind of revitalize some of this stuff. So we get into this mushroom farming business, and I actually got a degree in entrepreneurship.
Okay.
I didn't really think about it too much at the time. I thought entrepreneurship and kind of, I was a business major, but concentrating in entrepreneurship, I thought it would have a little bit more to do with running a business once you got one started. But really, the degree focused more on ideation and funding. Come up with a great idea, and how do you get funding and get that kind of, off the ground. So I wish I had focused a little bit more on management at the end of the day. Which is probably like the most boring thing you could select in college, but really would have been, a lot more beneficial for me in the long run. But I wanted to kind of try to put those entrepreneurial skills to work. And, my friend was living in Nashville, had kind of this idea for this mushroom farming business. And so we tried, we worked at it for maybe a year or two. Before I kind of finally said to myself, all right, this has been fun and I've enjoyed this, but it's time to go to work. It's time to do, I think, what I've always kind of wanted to, is trying to, stop putting off this call to duty to go up there and work at the family business and continue this legacy. Because I said my father passed away suddenly in 2003, and there hadn't really been a Kuehne involved in the day-to-day business since then. He left it to my mother, but obviously she's down in North Carolina raising 2 teenagers at the time, and she went back and forth a lot. But from a daily perspective, there hadn't been anybody involved in the operations there, so it was. I kind of thought to myself, hey, it's time that, we have some visibility over this. And I just got in at the ground level. I said, I'll do whatever you need me to do. I want to come work at the business. I'm not demanding to start at, COO or something like that. Just if you got a need, plug me in somewhere. Let me see what I can do here.
Cool.
So I ended up working in maintenance planning and scheduling. That was something that we were trying to fill out. And so they kind of created this job title for me because it was something they were contemplating, and they said, hey, maybe his skills could be relevant in here. Started out with maintenance planning and scheduling for our Delaware facility. And it was a great move. It really taught me a lot about the business. I got to see what the whole maintenance schedule was, learn the components, how the processes all work, what we did during outages, what the critical issues were. And so I really learned a lot. And then I was out there working with the guys on a regular basis, not hands-on, I'm not like a maintenance technician or anything like that, but really seeing what the problems were, what the issues were, and just got to know the people at the plant. That's been one of the things that I think has helped me a lot throughout my journey at the company, is kind of knowing the people from the bottom up, and understanding what their plights were and what their struggles were on a day-to-day basis, just trying to keep this thing running, For
sure. So, I mean, like let's kind of go back in time, and let's just talk about the founding of the business from your grandfather. And then at a really high level, explain to us non-chemical people, everything that Kuehne does, and, kind of what the processes are. What are you guys working on at a very high level so people can understand that?
Yeah. So my grandfather actually started the business in 1919. He came back from World War I with $100 war bond. So the legend goes, I never knew my grandfather, but he started the business in a basement in Jersey City, basically in his mom's basement in a bathtub. So he was just taking caustic and bubbling some chlorine in there to make bleach, and then selling that as a laundry detergent right there in the neighborhood, literally off the back of a horse-drawn buggy. And whites, tablecloths, white shirts, linens, things like that were huge at the time. Um, and so everybody kind of had a demand for bleach or some kind of detergent.
How did he have the idea for that? I mean, like, was there anything in the family? Like, how did he stumble on that?
I wish I knew a little bit more. He was kind of a chemist, sort of, they called him pharmacist back then, but he was kind of a chemist by trade.
Okay.
I don't know how he learned this stuff or anything. Unfortunately, I never knew him.
Did he do anything in the
But
war that was related to this, or?
I don't think so. No.
Interesting. Yeah.
But I really don't know much about that, sadly.
Yeah.
I think he served in the Navy, but I could be wrong on that front. But in Jersey City, interestingly enough, I think it was about around the turn of the century, around 1902, maybe 1908 timeframe.
Mm-hmm.
They were the first U.S. city to begin chlorinating water.
Huh.
So it was actually discovered, I think chlorine in general was discovered in London, and a scientist determined that if they chlorinated the wells there, they could reduce cholera outbreaks a significant amount. And this was a common problem in cities all across the world, New York even. There was an interesting show about that recently. They had different wells, and you knew some of the wells were better water than others.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why you would draw your water and then you boil it and everything. But some of these wells were just really contaminated with cholera and other waterborne disease. But Jersey City started chlorinating their water. So I think London had done it around 1900, 1896, something like that, and saw a drastic reduction in cholera outbreak. Jersey City was the first one to do it over here in the U.S., and it reduced the mortality rate so dramatically that it caught on like wildfire across the rest of the country. They said, we said, what are we doing? We can't go without this.
Yeah.
And the chlorine revolution has since been called the greatest advancement to human health and sanitation in history.
Wow.
Prior to the chlorination of water, that basically waterborne disease was the number one killer of humanity throughout history, more than famine, more than war, more than disease. Everything was related to water. You hear about it a lot about, in the medieval era. I love medieval history and the dysentery outbreaks that would occur in siege camps or wherever there was large gatherings of people, because the water would always get contaminated, and then that would start going around and start really affecting people and causing all kinds of havoc. So it was certainly something that we've struggled to deal with throughout history. So he started the business then, and it kind of started growing. And I think part of it was because they began chlorinating water. So chlorine demand started to grow. And then we bopped around a little bit throughout the 50s and 60s as we scaled up, and eventually landed in South Kearney, where we acquired, I think it was Marzol Chemical at the time, and began our real manufacturing process there. We then acquired the Delaware facility in 1989, I think, which was the year I was born, and then converted that to a brine to bleach facility in kind of like 1998 or so. And so basically, from a high level perspective, what we do is we make chlorine, and chlorine is what disinfects water. So there's a lot of misconceptions about chlorine and bleach and various, various chemicals and things that use chlorine. A lot of people just call it chlorine, but really, when it comes to bleach, chlorine is the active ingredient in bleach. So it's sodium hypochlorite. Chlorine is its own element, and it's on the periodic table. It's a pretty heavy gas. It's got a greenish kind of color, and you can use chlorine, raw elemental chlorine, to treat drinking water. And in fact, a lot of drinking water is still treated that way today. All of New York City's supply is actually treated via these chlorine ton containers. And what you do is, because it's a gas, you compress it down to about 300 psi, which then actually turns it into a liquid. So it's called liquid chlorine, but really at ambient pressure and temperature, it is a gas.
Got it.
So it's just compacted down like that. transport it and to make it more efficient to use. But that creates a lot of confusion in the market because people think liquid chlorine is bleach, but it's not.
Understood.
Bleach is a liquid with chlorine as its active ingredient. But the benefit of bleach is that you don't have, it's not under pressure. You don't have to have it pressurized or anything. It's very safe.
Mm-hmm.
If it spills on the ground, it eventually basically just turns back to salt water.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty basic chemical, and it's made, ironically enough, through salt water. So what we do in today, and I think we have kind of the most advanced manufacturing possible, is we take a concentration of brine or salt water. So we take city water, we add salt to it. Our salt supply is currently from Chile. They have one of the largest salt mines in the world. And then we run that through several filtration processes. A lot of it is just about removing all the heavy metals possible, because when you zap it kind of with this electrolysis process, if there's metals and contaminants in there, it will prevent that electricity from working where you want it to. So it breaks the bond of the salt, which is NaCl, so sodium and chlorine.
Mm-hmm.
So salt, everybody knows NaCl is table salt, right? And we break that out into its kind of individual chemical ingredients, and what we get is sodium hydroxide and then chlorine. And interestingly enough, hydrogen is also a byproduct of this, because you're running that electrolysis process on, brine, which is a lot of water. You get hydrogen as a byproduct of brine electrolysis. What we're really after is that chlorine molecule. But you get hydrogen as well, which is kind of interesting. It's a big topic these days with the push for renewable energies and things like that. And I think in this context where you're creating hydrogen as a byproduct, there's some use for it.
Are you guys collecting? Are you guys able to collect that byproduct?
We're working on that. We want to. It's been a real nightmare to get the proper permitting and everything in place to do that.
Okay.
And you would think with the push for all these renewables that we would be like target number one. Hey, you've been making this for 20 years and venting it to atmosphere, because they won't let you burn it. You can't burn it off. But anyways, it's an interesting story there. You can't just put it to a flame arrestor.
Yeah.
You have to go through the whole process of paying for it as a pollutant, even though hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe. And there's no harmful effects from hydrogen.
Yeah.
But we are trying to capture it. That's kind of one of the future looking pieces of the business, that we can monetize that hydrogen capture and sell it to people who are using it as an alternative fuel source. But after this electrolysis process, you get your individual chemicals, and then you mix those back in this titanium reactor. Titanium is about the only thing that bleach will not corrode. So it's a very important metal for us. And then we make bleach, we send it to our tank farm, and that's put in trucks of about 5,000 gallon and taken to wastewater or drinking water facilities. So the vast majority of our business is serviced directly to municipalities, where they're using it in some sort of water disinfection application. And if you think about the amount of sewage cities create, this process is absolutely essential to preventing pollution.
Yeah.
Again, if you just dumped all this sewage in the rivers and the oceans, it would devastate the environment. It'd truly be a disgusting, disgusting place to live. But these sorts of industrial processes are what allow us to treat that water, both the sewage and the drinking water side of things. So it's absolutely vital. I kind of say that Kuehne Company sits at this interesting crossroads of our standard of living.
Mm-hmm.
You have water, which is absolutely essential to life. Clean water is essential to life, essential to civilization. And because we consume so much power to create this, it's essential that the power that we have access to is both reliable and affordable. And as long as you have that mixture, you can then create clean water, which you can't go without clean water for about 2 days, or you're really going to be put in a bad position.
So I'm sorry to just jump in real quick. So you're saying, I mean, like you're selling to mostly to municipalities and things like that. I mean, do you have competitors that are out there doing the same thing as you? I mean, there would have to be a lot. I mean, there's so much of this to be done. I mean, like, how much are you guys able to cover, or is there more for you to be able to do? I mean, is there a Kuehne in every state? I mean, you can give me some kind of macro perspective on this. That'd be helpful.
Yeah, I'm still learning a lot about the market right now, but the way I see it, and from what I know from our customer base, we service about 11% of the U.S. population. So that's about 36 million people. We range from about DC up to Boston. And we're really kind of new entrants into the Boston markets. We just won a big account there recently that'll start this summer. And we have 3 facilities. So Connecticut, New Haven, Connecticut, Kearney, New Jersey, and Delaware here where I'm at, just south of Wilmington. And there's sort of 2 methods to making bleach. What has historically been done is the more simple method where you just get a rail spur and you buy a rail car of caustic and a rail car of chlorine, and then you have a reactor right there that you mix them together, you make your bleach, you put that in a truck, and you deliver. And then there's our method, which is the more advanced process of brine electrolysis. Now, brine electrolysis has been going on for a very, very long time. These were identified as, critical manufacturing components in many, many things, other than just drinking water. Right? There's markets for just chlorine. There's markets for caustic. Caustic is actually used in a lot of food processes and a lot of pH adjustment applications. So the real big giants in the market, the behemoths out there like Olin Corporation, Occidental Chemical, Westlake, they run brine electrolysis, but they basically just take those components that get split from the electrolysis process of caustic and chlorine, and they put the caustic in a rail car, they put the chlorine in a rail car, and then they ship that off to wherever it's needed. Those 2 components don't degrade on their own. So you can have that stuff sitting around for as long as you want, and it'll be the same concentration. The minute you make bleach out of it, though, a degradation process occurs. So you have a limited shelf life of this thing. It depends on the concentration that you make it at and the ambient temperature that's being stored at, how much sunlight's hitting it, all that stuff will change the degradation rate. But you've got roughly a month or so, maybe more than that, before it's really degraded down to a point that you might consider it to be less efficient. And so like down in Florida, the average concentration they're using on most of their industrial applications is like 12.5%, maybe 15%. In colder weather climates where the heat isn't as big of a deal, you can go up to higher concentrations. So we manufacture primarily at 20%, even though the industry standard has been 15% for many years. We found a way to actually manufacture at a higher concentration and then recover part of our raw materials, which is the salt, as a result of that. So when you get to about 22% manufacturing concentration, salt will actually begin to precipitate out of solution, which is very bad for storage containers and vessels and piping and everything. You don't want that in general. But if you manufacture at a high concentration and then remove that salt, you allow it to precipitate out in the manufacturing process, you can then reuse that salt to make the whole thing more affordable. So we've come up with a proprietary way to do that at our Delaware facility. We can manufacture in excess of 30%, and that allows us to recover about 25% of our salt, actually. So there's some significant cost savings there. And as that salt precipitates out of solution, it actually creates a cleaner end product. Our bleach is actually a much higher quality, and it actually has a lower specific gravity, which means that it's lighter. So 1 gallon of this very pure bleach will actually be lighter than an equivalent gallon of bleach that has not had the salt precipitated out and removed.
So is this the Paragon Ultra Pure bleach? So
yes.
Is anybody, this has had a huge impact on the industry. Is anybody else doing this?
Yeah, there's a couple other technologies out there. Olin Corporation, actually, from what I understand, leased the technology from the French, and they have it at a couple of their facilities. So we actually do purchase some of that from them. It's very high quality stuff that they send us into our Delaware or into our New Jersey and Delaware facility during the summertime when we can't produce enough to meet demand. We buy some finished product from them.
Okay.
So they have it. There may be some other people out there that have it too, but it's pretty rare, and there's not a lot of people that really know about it or have requested it on purpose. And that's kind of part of my mission of how we take the business into the future. How do we do business better and make business more efficient? So we're working on changing the way that we do business with these municipalities by opening their eyes to the fact that there are other choices out there other than just 15%. Philadelphia has been a huge customer of ours for many, many years, and they've been taking 20%, which is enormously powerful. If you go from 15 to 20%, you're essentially getting a third more chlorine per delivery. So, less water, more of the active ingredient that you really need to treat. That results in fewer deliveries that we have to make, a lower overall cost, because the transportation costs, especially over the last 20 or 30 years, has been rising a lot faster than other costs have. Taxes on diesel fuel, taxes on, the tolls, everything, none of that's going down, right?
Yeah.
And so if we can deliver more value with fewer deliveries, there's a lot of cost savings there that can be shared between the company and the client.
Got it.
The customer.
So I mean, we talked about the ultra pure bleach and the impacts that it's had on the industry, but the one thing that you and I've talked about offline here, which has been really interesting, is like the sustainability and what you guys are doing, because I guess I never realized how much power and energy it took to complete the process that you guys are. So can you get into that a little bit, and then how you guys see that and how you're trying to be as efficient as possible?
Yeah, that sustainability has been kind of one of those key words thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
Especially from the environmental side of things.
Yeah.
And to me, it goes hand in hand with commodity manufacturing.
Yeah.
You need to be as efficient as possible. I kind of look at them as in sustainability and efficiency. And we focus on efficiency because obviously we're making a commodity product here. Most bleaches are about the same thing. There is a little difference with the Paragon Ultra Pure Bleach, obviously. But we kind of look at that. We look at this as the next evolution in chlorination. It is much more sustainable and much more efficient, both for a ratepayer and for a business, to manufacture at a higher strength, deliver that higher strength, which is pure and better, and then the customer dilutes it on site. I mentioned in the beginning that the higher the concentration, the faster the degradation can occur. But as long as you manufacture it and deliver it in a timely manner, the customer can then basically just cut it by adding water, and that reduces that degradation curve. So you could still deliver it at a high concentration, and as long as they have some extra tank space, they just add water to it. They could bring it down to, they could bring a 25% solution down to 20 or 15 or 12.5, whatever works for them well. Especially depending on the season. You wouldn't really need to cut it with as much water in, January as you would in July with the major temperature differences that we can see, especially if you have outdoor storage or storage that's, not covered and out of the sunlight. So I think this is really the next evolution in sustainability and efficiency within our kind of little niche here.
Yeah.
For bleach in particular.
Interesting. So, I mean, it sounds like a lot of what you need to do to continue to grow the company is just through education, right? And just,
certainly,
that's like the biggest part of it, right? And it's just getting people to understand, how this works. My mind is kind of blown because I had no idea about any of this stuff. So
nobody thinks about what happens after you flush the toilet very often, and that's for good reason.
Yeah, absolutely.
We don't want to think about that. But to me, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Education is huge. Chlorine has gotten a bad reputation for a variety of strange reasons. But like I said in the beginning, it is the greatest advancement to human health ever.
Yeah.
To sanitization ever. You cannot underscore that enough, that what we do and the prevention, by disinfecting water, we prevent more disease and death as a result of that than I like to say than all the hospitals in the world prevent on a yearly basis. We prevent on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So it's absolutely essential to our standard of living, and people take that for granted. And to put it in perspective, just our South Kearney plant alone uses the equivalent of about 25,000 households of energy annually. So, it is a very energy intensive process. It's kind of right there in the name, electrolysis, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and and if we don't have affordable and reliable energy, that just means it's going to cost you more to drink water, to take a shower, to fill your pool up in the summertime.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to pay more for standard of living. That's what makes America great, and that this having low costs of living is what allows you to save for a vacation and enjoy time off and do things that other than work to pay to keep the lights on and the fridge running, and and the hot water hot. Nobody wants to pay for those things. So to me, it's kind of part of the mission. Not only does it benefit the business to have lower costs of energy, but it really is about society at large. We're critical infrastructure. If we go down, there will be a major problem for this entire Northeast corridor. It's not easy to do what we do.
Yeah, no, for sure. So, I mean, we didn't really get into this, but it's important because I mean, we're getting along on time here. So I wanted to hit this. You from handling maintenance, and planning at the facilities to now president. I mean, how did that trajectory occur? What are some of the things that you needed to learn during that time? And I guess if you could kind of give us a timeline from when you joined the company, after your not failed, but entrepreneurial attempt, then you moved into working in the family business. How did you go from where you were to just getting started to now being president?
Yeah, so like I said, I had a business degree. I ended up actually transferring from Drexel down to College of Charleston, getting that business degree. Probably concentrated in the wrong thing, but entrepreneurship was pretty interesting, and it definitely gave me a good idea of all the various components that go into a business.
Mm-hmm.
And I had always kind of painted this picture in my mind that this is what I wanted to do in the future. I wanted to go work for the family business, carry on the legacy, all that good stuff. So I moved up here to Delaware in 2017, very beginning of 2017, and started working in that maintenance, planning and scheduling
Mm-hmm.
role. Really learned how the process went, what the various stages of filtration were, electrolysis, how that ran. And then I moved into kind of fleet maintenance. Actually, there was kind of a need in our transportation division.
Mm-hmm.
So we're vertically integrated. We have manufacturing and we have our own transportation. This is what really allows us to kind of control our own destiny, as we say,
Yep.
and, have a little bit more visibility over our own deliveries.
Yeah.
So I think it really, really helps us with our ability to have a reputation of reliability. So I got involved in our transportation business for a little while, kind of saw how that was. I actually did dispatching for about 6 months to get a flavor for that. And then by 2022, I was kind of working on special projects because I kind of had a knack for seeing the issues that were out there.
Mm-hmm.
I had a good rapport with the people from my time down at the Delaware plant, so I was able to talk to people. They would open up to me. They would tell me, what their real problems were, and be honest with me about how we thought we could address those things. So I kind of became like a special projects manager, and was going to bounce around and kind of help be kind of a fixer for these various issues. And that was around 2021. Well, in 2022, our current CEO resigned a little bit suddenly. He had some health issues and family issues and stuff that I think put it in perspective, a very long commute. And so he resigned, and that's when I stepped up to become the president and fill in for him. And, hindsight 2020, was I fully prepared? No, I don't think you ever can be for a role like that. But trial by fire is often the quickest and best way to learn. So I remember being down in North Carolina, and he called my mom and told her he was resigning, and we kind of looked at each other and I said, all right, well, I better get back up there,
Yeah.
and see what's going on. So it was a little bit of a bumpy road for the first couple months, and um, you know had to learn a lot, drinking from a fire hose, so to speak.
Yeah.
But got up to speed, and I knew the business pretty well. And I credit having a great team around me, for my own, my own success, people that were willing to share with me, guide me, advise me. We had a good leadership structure in place, so we were able to kind of take that hit and absorb it and keep going. And it's never a flawless process, but to me, just showing up is about 50% of the battle.
Yeah.
That you get up, you put your boots on, and you get out there, and you just deal with what you can. As long as you do that, half the battle is already won.
Yeah, I can't
like I said,
agree with that more. I can't agree with that more.
Yeah.
Just showing up is half the battle. But on that
Yep.
note, that's a pretty big thing to step into, right? From maintenance, running fleet, special projects,
Yep.
now president. I think that it says a lot about who you are as a person, right? And I really have to say, I really appreciate the fact that you wanted to get into the business to preserve that legacy, because I would feel that in my heart if I was in your shoes, right? I would have said that's an important thing that I can continue to do for my family. But what would you attribute a lot of your personal success to? I mean, is there anything that you're doing on a daily basis to get better? I mean, are you a voracious reader? I mean, is there anything that you're doing to get better on a daily basis to continue to grow with this? Because if you were to tell me like, hey, I just kind of got into this, drank from the fire hose and I figured it out, like, you seem like, I've gotten the chance to engage with you multiple times now. You seem like the consummate professional that knows exactly what the hell they're doing. I would not have any other idea, but that.
I'm glad I can at least give off that persona. I don't think it's the truth. And I wish I could tell you about my Spartan regimen of working out and everything like that. But, I'm just as much a failure on those fronts as I think a lot of us, especially being a new dad here, 6 months in. That routine is very hard to keep. You know, like I said, half of it, I think, is just showing up, leaning on others who are experts in those fields to advise you. I've heard this about a lot of leaders, that you want to surround yourself with better people than yourself.
Yeah.
So having that humility, and just listening.
Yeah.
I think a good leader.
Does the company have any systems set up that are kind of in place that helped you to kind of plug yourself in and figure that out? Like, a good reporting structure. I mean, like the previous CEO, did he have everything kind of lined up and, running efficiently so that you could kind of step into the role and just learn the processes, anything like that?
I would struggle. I think one of the biggest challenges I've had, in my transition into leadership here is really, this 100-year-old business that was very, very paternal, very kind of stuck in our ways. One of the things I heard a lot, well, that's the way we've always done it.
Oh yeah.
Why would we do it differently? So I recognize this coming in as kind of a younger leader, and perhaps that's one of my strengths, is that we can't keep doing things the way we've done them for the last 100 years.
Yeah.
Now, there's some things from a cultural perspective, taking care of our people, treating people right, having good benefits, a safe place to work. Of course, you want to keep all those things going. But I read a great article one time, and I think that's one of the things I try to do, is just play devil's advocate to my own ideas and try to read about opposition, things that, if you have an idea in your mind, well, challenge it a little bit. Can you go and do some research? Can you find something out there that says otherwise? Is there data? And that's one of the things I've tried to do is overcome this mark of a data resistant culture. We certainly had that. We were not very tech savvy, like from the back end of things.
Mm-hmm.
So, our manufacturing processes, that's in the engineering of that's where all the time and effort is always gone. And we have state of the art manufacturing plants as a result of that. But, pre-COVID, we didn't know how to use Teams. I don't think a lot of people did.
Yeah.
So I think COVID forced some of that. I sort of had to lead us through kind of the latter half of COVID. Like I said, in 2022, it really didn't start till 2020. And so I kind of inherited the back end of COVID, and that makes you ask yourself a lot of principles based questions about how you want to react to this environment, what you want to do. So I've tried to create, I sort of set out a vision and a mantra when I got into office there, that says, I want to create a culture of continuous improvement.
Yeah.
We want to do this by being data driven and sharing the knowledge.
Yeah.
And I think that's a simple enough thing from a values perspective, that allows other people to kind of latch on and drive towards those goals without them being overly difficult.
Yeah.
You want to have it simple so that anybody can afford it. And I think the other thing is just listening. One thing I've tried to do in my life, and sometimes I laugh at myself for this later, but I've really prayed for wisdom.
Yeah.
Oftentimes the way that you receive wisdom or learn wisdom is not a fun process.
Of course
so
not,
I've kicked myself for asking for that.
Yeah.
Because it has come, but it's been at a great cost sometimes.
Yeah.
But I think you gain wisdom through listening. At the higher levels of strategic leadership, it's not about getting down and doing the work yourself. It's nice when you can, but I'm never going to be an expert accountant. I'm never going to be an expert maintenance technician. I'm never going to be an IT director or an HR professional. So I think at my level, and I learned some of this from my mother, a lot of it is just about being the moral compass for the business.
Yeah.
So you look at things through the lens of, what kind of incentive does this create? Something as simple as vacation packages. Are we going to buy back vacation at the end of the year? Well, it's a nice thing to do, but the incentive being that people won't use their vacation because now they can sell it back for, a couple $1,000 at the end of the year, whatever, as an extra bonus.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think so many leaders, especially politicians, have to grapple with. We have all these programs that are designed to make the world a better place, but at the end of the day, what kind of incentive does it really create? Because human nature is oftentimes more geared towards going after the incentive than doing the right thing, or making something that's idealistic work perfectly.
I got one for you. I was vacationing with a friend. I told you last week, with my wife and a family friend, and his company gave him, after a certain number of years of service, a 3-week sabbatical. And it was like, you can't access your email. You can't access anything for 3 weeks. Like, you are dead to them for 3 weeks. And it sounded like the most liberating feeling in the world, because I couldn't go on vacation for a week without checking emails and all that kind of stuff. So I'll give you that one. But I have to compliment you. I think that the point and the biggest nugget that I took away from this is, I think a lot of people have a lot of really great ideas, but sometimes you don't want to play devil's advocate and try to poke the holes in things. And I think the fact that you do that, I think that's something that people can really, take a lot away from this. As far as if people want to get in touch with you, Zach, what's the best way to do that? I mean, are you active on LinkedIn or social at all?
Yep, I am on LinkedIn. I prefer to keep the junk calls away. No, I'm not interested in selling the business. I get a lot of private equity interest and things like that, because it is a fairly recession-proof business. Everybody's always going to need clean water. That's never going to change.
Yep.
But yeah, LinkedIn is the best way to get in touch.
Cool.
My company email address, zkuehne@kuehnecompany.com. Also an easy way to shoot me an email or something. If I like it, I'll get back to you.
Sounds like a plan. I'm glad that you accepted my email. The investment banker calls you up to be on a podcast, not, hey, can I represent the sale of your business? But And then the one thing that I've been doing with all of my guests, the $1 million question, I'd love to ask you and get that from you before we wrap up. But, when you look back on your journey, personally and professionally, what's one moment that felt, really small at the time, but ended up changing everything for you?
Well, I think it was quite literally the decision to move up here and work at the company. I didn't realize, what a journey I was putting myself on at the time. And I didn't do it with, you know, like no, feeling of responsibility or anything like that. But certainly would have never been able to predict how much my life would have changed. And just everything that's happened on, as a result of that one small choice. I mean, literally moving, 700 miles away to an area which you don't know at all, don't have any friends, don't have any family other than your coworkers, of course, which have been awesome support network for me. But yeah, I suppose at the time it didn't feel like such a massive decision. And, one of the other ones too is that, that whole scenario where our CEO resigned. I did not think I would be in this position for many more years. But as a result of him stepping down, it kind of created this opportunity. And I think, patience paid off a little sooner than I thought it would. So it's been a blessing. Certainly a little bit of a trial by fire, but I'm very proud to lead this business forward into the next generation, and kind of like I say, meld the old ways with the new. I think that's actually a quote from The Last Samurai, where they inscribed that on his sword. And last time I watched that movie, I said I'll probably never watch this again. But that was a good part of it, where they present him with that katana, and he melds the old ways with the new. I feel like I kind of try to do that a lot with bringing in kind of the younger generation's perspective on technology, and how are we going to get ourselves online? One of the next projects we have is creating this customer portal so that people can enter their own orders, have more visibility over their own orders. Things that seem pretty commonplace in today's world, that the entire chemical manufacturing market is decades behind on. So I look forward to it, and I think those things are going to really pay off in the end.
Well, hopefully you'll take my call in like 5 or 10 years, because I'd love to check in and see how things are going.
Absolutely, and stay in touch.
Yeah, I certainly will. But thank you so much for joining us today. This was a really interesting conversation about something that I don't think people really think too hard about, but they're going to get a lot out of, Zach. So I appreciate you, Zach Kuehne from the Kuehne Company. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate you, Michael.